Hello, I'm Rhett Power,
And I'm Cynthia Johnson.
and we're the host of this new weekly show featuring today's most important best-selling business and self-help authors.
Yes, we are here to have them talk about their books and let us know why we should be buying them. And today we have
A good friend of mine, international best-selling author Michael Bungay Stanier, MBS, but not the MBS and the guy that runs Saudi Arabia, to be clear. But Michael, if you did have your own country, I think you would be a wonderful ruler, and I would
I'd be a terrible ruler. I mean, sometimes people go, Michael, why don't you go into politics? And I'm like, I would just be eaten alive in the world of politics. I am lacking backbone and ruthlessness and ability to compromise. It would be a disaster. Look, this household of 2 people and 2 cats is barely functioning. I think putting me in charge of a country would not be the right move.
Well, I think you would be a very benevolent leader. I think that would be maybe a crazy, insane, dysfunctional place to live, but peaceful and loving, definitely.
Oh, gosh, yeah. Well, thank you.
But you're the author of 6. You're the author of 6 books that sold over 1 million copies. You're best known for The Coaching Habit, which is the best-selling coaching book of the century. It's recognized already as a classic, and you're a Rhodes Scholar. You say you play the ukulele badly, but I don't believe it. He's founded a training company called Box of Crayons that's taught hundreds of thousands of people around the world. And you've got a book partnership with Seth Godin that's raised over $400,000 for Malaria No More. Yeah. You're a global guru, a thought leader, number one thought leader in coaching. You've got 2 books I want to talk about today. The coaching, we're not going to talk about The Coaching Habit. We may get into it a little bit, but How to Begin by Start Doing Something That Matters, and your new project, which I'm excited to talk about, which is How to Work with Almost Anyone. That seems like a real challenge, particularly in this day and age. And I think that's why that's relevant, right? Because of the day and age that we live in.
You know, just to point out the difference, one small difference between those 2 books, because you're right, I'm writing between 2 books. And most books you write, in my experience, you write a book and then you work really hard to try and find a title that kind of captures the book. And I know for How to Begin, I was like, it took us a long time to land on a title that I thought was actually powerful and interesting and kind of captured both the problem and the solution in a title. With this new book, How to Work with Almost Anyone, when the title arrived in my brain, I'm like, that is a brilliant title. And everybody I've told the title to, everybody kind of does what you did, right? Which is like, oh yeah, we need this. Yeah. I need this. So with that book, I'm like, I just need to try and write a book that kind of lives up to the quality of the title, because the title crushes it. Let's just hope that the book is good as well.
I think I may have actually searched that exact title in Audible and other platforms. Yeah. Maybe regularly at this point, honestly.
Well, I do have to work with Rhett. I mean, I can't help. I'm good, but I'm not that good, Cynthia. I mean, I'll give you the best tips I can, but Rhett's tricky.
That's the truth.
We live in your country, so I think we're on a good start to figure it out. Oh, amazing.
Well, we have questions, Michael.
All right. I may have answers. I can't promise it, but I'll give it my best shot.
Fantastic. So to start, I want to talk a little bit about your pushback on power structures. We've been informed, or I've recently been informed of some unsubtle, sort of direct ways that you have pushed back on traditional power structures. Similar, I think the example was something about a lawsuit in law school. And then unique ways of disrupting publishing.
Yeah.
So
well,
start with the law story.
Yeah. I mean, all of those are, you know, the saying, inspiration is when your past suddenly makes sense. When you look back on your past and you're like, oh, I'm seeing clues to that kind of give a hint to the person I'm trying to become today, who I am now and who I might grow into as well. So there are definitely some moments in my past. You know, I was sued for defamation by one of the professors in my law school as I finished law school. In fact, they were very conflicted because I just won a Rhodes Scholarship. So I was this big fancy pants man on campus because it's a big deal to win a Rhodes Scholarship. And at the same time, I was being sued by one of their professors because I'd objected to the way that he was teaching a point of law. And the example he was using to teach the point of law was a woman getting raped. And the point of law didn't need a woman being raped. And I was just like, there's other ways of teaching this that are a little more sensitive. Anyway, I went around that in perhaps the wrong manner and ended up being sued. It all petered out in the end, but it was certainly one of those early moments when I realized that law is a way power is used in this world to make people quiet, to assert authority, to embed privilege. And I kind of got a personal taste of that. And then with publishing, well, the Coaching Habit book, which has had this outsized success, it sold more than 1 million copies and it's kind of thundering along, but it got rejected 4 or 5 times by a publisher. I couldn't believe it because I'd published a book with them already and I was so sure that they were going to say yes to this book, but they kept saying no. And I kept going, okay, well, I'll go away and try and come up with another version of the same book. And I come back going, here it is. And they're like, nope, no, but go away and try again. And then at a certain point in there, I was like, okay, this is the idea. Take it or leave it. Very confident that they were going to take it. Totally misread the room. They said, no, we're not interested. I was like, nah. But after a certain amount of licking my wounds and kind of weeping into my beer, I was like, you know what, I'm going to have a crack at self-publishing, but I'm going to do it really well. I'm going to publish as if I was a professional. And, that turned out to be a great bet to place because the Coaching Habits had success. Financially, for people who don't know how publishing works, it's like normally you get about 8% as the author of the cover price as royalties. When you publish it yourself, you get 3 or 4 times that. So it really worked out for me in lots of ways. But all of that, those are just minor skirmishes in life. I do think that there's ways that the world work that create hierarchy and create privilege. And there's a place for hierarchy for sure. But I also think I'm interested in, particularly in organizational life, of like, how do we disrupt hierarchy? How do we use hierarchy for good and disrupt hierarchy in the way that it has a way of kind of dehumanizing people, putting people one up or one down? And so often in like the work in coaching is around balancing power by empowering people. And in this new book, How to Work with Almost Anyone, it's about trying to find relationships where there's a shared responsibility for building the best possible working relationship together.
So why did you, and going back to How to Begin, why did you write that book? What was the impetus behind that? What led you down that road of seeing there was a need?
Well, I didn't really mean to write that book, if I'm honest about it. I having written The Coaching Habit and then the sister book to that called The Advice Trap, I thought to myself, look, the thing I'm best at, if I'm best at anything, is trying to make complicated things feel accessible and simple. Like the Coaching Habit works because I've kind of unweirded coaching. And I still wasn't sure if I got to the heart of why behavior change is so difficult. And I was like, how do I find a simpler way to make that feel more accessible for people? Because we're all hungry for behavior change. We want to grow and evolve. And it's really hard. We all get stuck. Even if you read Atomic Habits, habit building is not enough to change the way that you act. So I started writing a book on behavior change. And I sent out a first draft to some friends. And one of the friends, Misha, after 3 days, wrote back and said, Michael, I've read most of this first draft. It's a disaster. I don't know what you're trying to write here, but this is like the worst book. It's not even a book, really, is it? You don't know what you're writing about. And I was like, okay, I know first drafts are not meant to be good, but they're not meant to be quite that bad. So anyway, I felt like I was picking through the rubble of this book going, is it all for the cutting room floor or is anything salvageable here? And there was one line that I'd written that I thought was pretty good. We unlock our greatness by working on the hard things. Because there's something there about we unlock behavior change. We move from present me to future me, that next step in our evolution and our growth. And we do it by working on the hard things, not by winning, not by succeeding, but by finding the right hard thing for you to work on and committing to it and having that shape you and grow you as you shape and grow and work on that hard thing. I was like, that's interesting. And it was from that seed that How to Begin, which is about how do you find a worthy goal, a hard thing, a worthy goal, something that is thrilling and important and daunting for you, so that you contribute to the world, make the world a better place, but you also unlock your greatness in doing that work.
Interesting.
This all sounds amazing. So how? How do we actually change and change our behavior or change our environment? What is the first step?
Well, I think there's different ways of doing it, but if you want to look at what I suggest in How to Begin, I think a first thing is going to yourself. I might be up for taking on a hard thing. I might be up for being brave enough to say yes to trying to figure out what something that is thrilling, in other words, lights you up, important, in other words, gives to the world. Jacqueline Novogratz, who's wrote a book called A Manifesto for a Moral Revolution, says, what if you could give more to the world than you take? So for me, important is that, give more to the world than you take. And daunting, something that takes you to the edge of your own learning and your own sense of self and competence and confidence. And it's in taking a guess and defining that you start making this journey. But then the deeper thing, Cynthia, and this is kind of like part 2 of a 3-part book, is to commit to it. It's one thing to define it and draft it and articulate it till you find something that you're like, I am excited about this. This feels like the perfect blend of thrilling, important, and daunting. But then a commitment comes at this deeper level, and you've got 2 choices. Do you do it or do you not do it? It's all very Star Wars and Yoda, and there is no try, there is only do and not do. And I'm like, that is right. There is only do and not do. And one of the ways that I kind of frame this is like every time you have a choice, there are prizes and punishments. Every choice has prizes and punishments. So you're trying to weigh up, do the prizes outweigh the punishments? So you could not do this. You got really clear what you want to do, and you could say no. And there are prizes and punishments to that. The prizes are you maintain the status quo. You stay comfortable. You don't disrupt others' expectations of you. You don't disrupt your own sense of self. You stay, in a comfortable place. The punishment is you don't get to serve the world. You don't get to grow. You don't get to learn. And then, of course, there's prizes and punishments of saying yes to this. And you're saying yes to a new version of who you are. You're saying yes to being brave. You're saying yes to actually contributing in that next best way for you. But there's risk there as well. That's the punishment, which is like, what if you fail? What if this doesn't work? What if people reject you? What if tearing the status quo has you exiled from your community in some way? And it's down to making that choice. But, behavior change, certainly habit building is a key part of that. And, the coaching habit is part of that. Atomic Habits is part of that. But at that deeper level, you're saying yes or no to the deep commitments you have to the status quo, or leaving some of that behind for whatever's next.
So before we get into the new book, I want to follow up on one question that I had from what you were just talking about, and it's the worthy goal. Is there a process, or is there because that's heavy, and that takes a lot of deep thought. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of self-work to get to that.
Yep.
Is there a process, or is there a way that you have those discussions with yourself and your tribe and your people and your team about what that is how do you get to that? Because like, if you're like me, I'm a kid in a candy store. I have the worst case of ADD in the world, and all kinds of ideas sound wonderful.
That's right. So often you've got one of two things going on. One is you got nothing. You're like, I don't even know where to start. Or maybe you're like Rhett and you're like, I got everything. Like I suffer from SOS, shiny object syndrome. And you're like, oh, I could do this, or I could do this, or I could do this.
Yeah.
So the 2 suggestions here is, first of all, draft and redraft and redraft. So if you're not sure, just get something down on paper. Write a crappy first draft. Everything starts with a crappy first draft. Everything starts with a crappy first draft. So rather than going, I have to figure out what's perfect in my head and get paralyzed by the sense of if it's not perfect and if I don't know it exactly, I can't do anything. It's like you start by writing a crappy first draft. And then in the book, there are all these suggestions and nudges to quickly iterate. So when I'm teaching this, in an hour, I'll get people to have written 3 drafts of a worthy goal for them. And it won't be perfect yet, but it'll just get them closer to articulating what's going on. If you're like you, Rhett, and you're like, too many things, one of the questions I often get is like, well, how many worthy goals can I have? Like 10? Like 20? And I'm like 1 or maybe 2. I've balanced 2 before, and that was hard. I've tried 3 and failed at 3. It's like too many. I can't juggle 3 worthy goals because this is like, you know, that old story about how many stones can you fit in a jar? You know, you got stones and pebbles and stuff. How do you get it all in a jar? You're like, you got to start with the big stones and then the medium stones and then the pebbles and then the sand and then whatever else. This is one of those bigger rocks that you're putting in your jar. You're like, this is something that is worth my time and my effort and my resource and my attention and my commitment. So at a certain point, you have to make a choice, Rhett. And here's what a choice gives you. It gives you guilt and it gives you anxiety. This is the adult reality of making hard choices, because you feel guilt about the things you're saying no to, and you've got anxiety about have you made the right choice. But you can choose to look at that guilt and anxiety as not as a bug, but as a feature. It's like, you know you're dealing with something important. You know you're going to take your best guess around this, and you start on something. And for me, it's like you do the drafting, you make the choice, you cross the threshold, you try it out for a while, because it's not like getting married where you're like, we're trying to do this for the rest of our lives. A worthy goal has a lifespan to it, and it could be 6 months or it could be 12 months or maybe 2 years, but it's got an arc to it. And if you've made the wrong choice, and that sometimes happens, you're like, that's okay, I'll go back and give it another shot. But what's the best way to do it is take your best guess, and then go test it in reality for a while and see what that teaches you.
I think sometimes we often know what that is, Michael. I think if we listen to ourselves, I think that purpose or that worthy goal does stand out. Like you said, there are a bunch of shiny objects around. And if you pay attention to what stirs your soul, what's moving you, in a real way, I think you can get to it probably without really guessing. I think it's I think it's there, and I think it's probably pretty obvious.
Well, I think that's true sometimes. I think sometimes it's true, and people are like, it's there, and I'm pretending it's not there because it makes me a bit twitchy to say yes to it.
Yeah.
I think for other people, it's like, I'm not totally sure. I mean, I know in the community we have, which is people working on their worthy goals, some people have a real clarity to it. Some people are in the process of trying to figure it out, but they're actively engaging in the question rather than hoping it'll just miraculously appear, because that doesn't happen. And I know for me, I'm often a bit like you, Rhett. Probably I've got some choices to make. I'm like, I've got some ideas. And I'm like, my mantra is, Michael, just take your best guess and get cracking on it, because you don't want to waste months or years being paralyzed because you're like, I can't make the perfect choice, so I won't make a choice.
Yeah.
I would say too, if you're like me, that just hearing you talk about this, the choice starts to boil up to the top, the surface. You know, it's like if you're
what's boiling up?
Well, just the idea that where am I spending my time, and
right.
where should I be going? As you're talking, I'm like, I immediately know the real question, and I think it's probably true for many of our viewers too. They understand that. Oh yeah, that's the thing. The thing you're thinking about right now is probably the thing you have to decide on.
And the community we have, it's amazing because we get to see all sorts of different iterations of what that is. One of the some of the baggage that sometimes shows up with the idea of a worthy goal is that like it has to be big, like, you know, you have to be Gandhi and I'm going to liberate India or something like that. And I'm like, it doesn't have to be big. You can do a worthy goal at the scale that works for you, for your family or for your neighborhood or for your team or, you know, for your community, whatever that might be. So we've had people write books. We've had people start a homeless shelter. We've had people just say, I'm going to reinvent how I am as a dad, because that's what's really important to me. So there's you know, people started a PhD. Some people have left a job and found a job. Some people have tried to just move to embrace retirement. It's a really rich thing that calls people forward. There's not a single type of worthy goal, but they all have this element of, this is thrilling. It's important to me. It's important to the world, and it's daunting. I don't really know how to do it. I just know I need to take the first few steps to start trying to figure this out.
So let's talk about how to work with almost anyone, because I know that is a big question in people's minds today.
Yeah.
And, you know, I hear it from my teams that I coach. I mean, I had an instance last week with a client where there was a shouting match in the hall between two people, right? And so this is super relevant, I think. What are there are a bunch of questions, but there are 5 questions I think you talk about that are essential.
There are, but the starting point for that, Rhett, is what's going on here? What are you trying to build? What does it mean to work with almost anyone? And the goal I'm hoping people take on is, how do I build the best possible relationship with the key people with whom I work? It's not trying to build the best relationship, because if you think about your current and your past working relationships, my bet is you've got a bit of a bell curve going. You've got a few people at one end and you're like, I love working with this person. We clicked, we brought out the best in each other. We danced our way through the problems. We enjoyed the moments of success. It was fantastic. And my guess is you probably got some people at the other end of the spectrum where you're like, oh my God, this was just misery. It was like sand in the gears the whole time. You know, and sometimes you're like, it's because that person's a nutcase. And sometimes it's like, they weren't even a terrible person. We just had our own anxieties and our own things, and we just couldn't figure it out. And then for most of us, we got kind of a bunch of people in the middle where it's just like, it's perfectly okay. It's not particularly wonderful. It's not particularly terrible. It's adequate. Right. And I'm like, each one of those relationships, wherever it is on the bell curve, has a degree of potential to it. And the goal is, can you expand its potential to be as much as possible? And can you live into it as much as possible? So we're not living in fantasy land. We're not trying to turn the bad relationships into great relationships. We're trying to make them less bad and more functional. We're trying to make the solid ones in the middle to be as good as they can be. And we're trying to keep the great ones as great as long as possible. So there's this commitment to go, how do I, with the key relationships that I have, whether that's your team, whether that's your boss, whether that's your co-podcast host, whether it's somebody you're collaborating with, whether it's a customer, whether it's somebody you're even in a sales conversation with, how do you make that as good as it can be? And the key idea is, why don't you have a conversation about how you work together before you have a conversation about what you're working on? So for you, Rhett and Cynthia, I'm like, you're co-hosting a show, and there's one part of you that's like, let's talk about this show. It's going to be amazing. Good-looking authors, interesting books, a million worldwide audience, glamour, fame. We're probably going to be hosting the Oscars in the next year or two. Yeah, it's going to be fantastic. And it's like, and then you're like, and do you have the microphone, and how will we stream it, and how we get out in the world? And you're into the how of it, the kind of what are we going to be working on? And there's a conversation that I bet you had in some version or another, and I'm just trying to formalize this a bit, which is like, hey, Rhett, hey, Cynthia, how will we work together to have the best possible relationship as we co-create this show? How will we work together as hosts? How will we work together as producers and as visionaries and creators around this? You know, Rhett, when you've worked with people before to co-create stuff, what worked really well and what drove you nuts. And wouldn't that be helpful to tell Cynthia that? And Cynthia, when you've co-created stuff with people and it's like, sometimes it's gone great and sometimes it's like, this is misery. Well, that would be really helpful for Rhett to hear. So that's the big idea here, which is like, talk about how you're going to work together, because that allows you to build a relationship that is safe and also vital and also repairable, more fixable. So you have a relationship that is more productive and longer lasting.
Repairable. I love that, because that makes complete sense to me. You don't get to middle age without working with lots of people. I feel like that's definitely something I hadn't heard before, and I'm excited to. Yeah,
you're right to pick that up, Cynthia, because of those three elements, safe, vital, and repairable. Repairable is the one least familiar to people, because we've all started to hear about psychological safety. Amy Edmondson kind of popularized that, and we all get that. We need to make working relationships feel safe for people. So, as Amy would say, we can say the things that need to be said, but also more than that, we can kind of show up more fully as who we are. There's a term that I hadn't heard before called coverage. It comes from a study in Deloitte, which is, like 70% of young people feel that they can't bring their whole self to work, and they call that coverage. People of color often call it code switching. I need to be able to blend in, kind of hide a more essential side of who I am. But it's not just about safety. It's also about vitality. How do you make this working relationship alive, with adventures and with some edge and with some provocation and with some growth and with kind of, if it's all safe, it can be a bit smothering. But if it's all vital, it can be a bit dangerous. So you need to find the right tension between safe and vital for you and that other person. It'll be different every relationship. And then you can bet your bottom dollar that somewhere down the line, something's going to go wrong. Something's going to go off the rails. Like, you're going to get off this interview with me, and Cynthia, you're going to go, Rhett, honestly, man, why did you say that thing? Why did you do? What's with the beard? Really? I mean, are we really going with the beard? It's like, and there'll be just something where you're like, I thought this was going to be different. I thought this was going to be good. It'll happen. It could be a big thing. It could be a small thing. It's often not a deliberate thing. But if you've got the opportunity to say, so let's tidy this up, let's make this clean and clear. If you actively repair a working relationship, there's a very good chance it actually gets stronger as a result of that.
Is it, there's a little anxiety I just felt when you said, have that conversation around how we work. Because what that says to me is, I've got to tell Cynthia all my shortcomings.
That's more of a conversation. It's more like an 8-hour monologue. That's a lot. I get that. Yeah, you're not alone. I'm really glad you brought this up, Rhett, because this is an unusual, and I'm going to say often slightly awkward conversation, certainly the first few times you do it. It's not actually about, here are all my shortcomings. It is actually about, here's how you bring out the best in me. Here's how you avoid the worst in me. Okay. So you get to share what's available for you to share. In my experience, there's a real value to the more you can talk about. Look, I know looking at me, you would think that I am a flawless human being, but it turns out not so much. I actually do have some flaws. Let me tell you about how they are. Let me tell you how to manage them. But it's also true that depending on who you are, depending on the relationship, depending on the power structure, there's going to be more or less that you want to share. For me, when I'm working with my team as the founder of 2 companies, I'm often the more senior person. I often have the balance of power and status. So that gives me an ability to role model greater vulnerability. So I'll say things like this. So in terms of responsiveness, I'm either very good or very bad. I either get stuff turned around really quickly, or I become the senior vice president of bottlenecking. And I'm like, stuff vanishes into the black hole of my inbox or my to-do list, and you never see it again. And what you'll be tempted to do is to politely wait because, you know, I'm your boss or I'm senior to you in some way, and you're like, you shouldn't nag me. So here's how I'm going to suggest you manage that. One is, don't be polite, but kind of call me on it. I appreciate that if you can do that. Secondly, here's what's really helpful for me. You send a note that says, Michael, I'm sending you this for approval by end of day Thursday. If I don't hear from you, I'll assume it's approved. And now that gives you the freedom to not get stuck by my shortcomings. Honestly, it gives me so much freedom to go, you know what, I can just not approve this and it'll get sorted out because I can't be bothered to go into the details of it, but I scanned it and, you know, It's not going to be a disaster if I don't make some tweaks to this. So it's freeing for both of us. But you're right, Rhett. I've got a degree of self-awareness that that's my patterns of behavior. And I've got a comfort to sort of say, look, here's my mess. Help us avoid my mess, because we both win if we avoid my mess.
Right. But it's free, as you know, it's freeing because if you set that tone, hopefully in what you get back is the same, right? So that you can.
Exactly right. You know, there's a saying I love from my friend Mark Bowden, which is like, be the strongest signal in the room, because the strongest signal dictates how far other people go. So when I'm like facilitating or giving a speech in front of a lot of people, I actively try and role model a vulnerability and a lightness and a willingness, because I want that to infect the room. So that becomes what other people are doing. And in this conversation, if you're the more senior person, the extent to which you're willing to be open and vulnerable and candid and real and human is exactly the extent that the other person will do the same.
Wonderful. Well, I hate to wrap it up.
I know.
Because we could go on.
We're coaching.
So how do we get the book? When is it out? All those kind of good details.
Yeah, you know, the new book, How to Work with Almost Anyone, is coming out June 27th. And if you go to bestpossiblerelationship.com, you'll find downloads and bonuses and other bits and pieces, and also some hints on how you can buy the book if you are so moved. And of course, it'll be in all those places that you can buy books. If you want How to Begin or The Coaching Habit or The Advice Trap or some of the other books I've written, the hub for all of that is mbs.works, which is my website. And that's where we help unlock greatness, yours and the other person's.
Wonderful. Well, Michael, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me on the show.
And I am Rhett Power, your co-host. And
I am Cynthia Johnson.
And they're both going to have a conversation after we hang up here.
Well, I appreciate you being with us today. We'll be back next week with another episode.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.